Hi, this is Charles Kelly. How are you doing today? It's Friday in London here on a cloudy day. And now you may recall that in July I reported that a judge in a county court had ruled that landlords cannot advertise their properties and then say no DSS or working tenants only. So it became a ruling as such, and it's been picked up by the media and all this sort of thing, and it does seem that still landlords are continuing to advertise no DSS on their properties, and now the BBC, that unbiased organisation, as you might call it, have launched their own investigation into this. They're now investigating landlords and finding that landlords are actually still advertising against this judge's ruling, that they're still advertising no DSS. And they've highlighted a young couple. We've been looking for a place for 2 years, and we can't find anything because they won't accept no. And I look at the guy and I say, this guy's a young guy. Why doesn't he get a bloody job? In 2 years, he hasn't managed to get a bloody job. And so I'm sorry, but that's the way I feel. So, some of these people are swinging the lead and they're layabouts. Benefits is meant to be a safety net, not a lifestyle choice forever. Now, I know there are people in difficult circumstances, single mums and all the rest of it. Yes, but a lot of people, believe me, are swinging the lead. They're on benefits, and some of them are even doing little cash jobs on the side. It goes on. We all know it goes on, and you can say what you like. But anyway, this thing has gone on, and as I said last month, this judge said that this was a case of a single mother of two who'd experienced indirect discrimination when a letting agency refused to rent to her. And she subsequently contacted this organisation called Shelter, which I'll talk about in a second, and they took her case all the way to court, funded by Shelter, which also receives government funding, by the way. It's meant to be a charity. Well, it is a charity, but it acts in different ways, I think. And I'll talk about that. Anyway, the judge ruled that DSS bans are against equality laws and the Equality Act, and it was District Judge Victoria Mark. Now, incidentally, this was ruled in York County Court, not the High Court in London, not the Appeal Court, not the European Court of Human Rights, not the Supreme Court. This was in a county court where you go and sue somebody for £500, or you have a dispute and this sort of thing. So quite it's sometimes called the small claims court, right? This is what this judge has said. So this is not binding in law, okay? These kind of rulings, as they say, are nothing more than persuasive authorities which may influence judges in similar cases, in other similar cases. And my experience of the county courts is that you could go to one judge and they say this, and another judge will say that. I know this because I sued a large number of people for money, and the differences in the judges was astounding. One judge would say, yeah, I can see that they owe you the money, right? I rule against that, bang. Another judge made it like a 2-hour trial and questioned me as if I was the rogue, and then he ruled against me, and then I appealed, and that got thrown out as well. So it's crazy what goes on in these district courts. It's just totally subjective. It depends on which judge you get, which side of bed they get out on in the morning, whether they've read your bundle. Yeah, they do read the bundle, but if they don't like the way the bundle's laid out, they might just say, well, I can't read that, I can't find that in the bundle, and all this sort of stuff. And barristers and solicitors know this. They say, oh, we can't upset the judge, you have to lead the judge down the road and be very careful what you say, you don't want to upset the judge, and all this sort of stuff. And it's all wrong. It should be cut and dried. Anyway, that's my rant there about county court systems. It's county court system is uses technology based on the last century. It's not even up to this century, and a lot of stuff is paper based. Yeah, you can do online claims and that sort of thing, but it still comes out to bundles in paper that's printed everywhere, and the whole process is so slow. So when we talked about this tenant eviction ban, when that eventually ends, it's been extended, as I said. When that eventually ends, it's going to take months and months and months to get your case even to court, let alone get these, pretty hopeless county court bailiffs to actually enforce things. The system's creaking. It's just a very outdated system of so-called justice, believe me. Anyway, the BBC said that the landlords are still flouting this rule. However, now the landlords trade body, which is the National Residential Landlords Association, of which I'm a member, the deputy director said that they always advise landlords that they shouldn't blanket ban benefit claimants, but the fundamental issue was the affordability of renting. Now, incidentally, this case was against the letting agent, not the landlord. But yeah, some landlords, I'm sure, do say no DSS. You see it on Spare Room and that sort of thing. And an actual Spare Room, I don't know about now, but Spare Room had a tick box thing where you could say, do you accept DSS tenants? And you could tick it or not tick it, So that's there. I don't know if they've changed that in the last few weeks since this ruling. But he points out that, there are issues with universal credit, how long it takes to pay benefits, how long it takes to set up, that there can be a shortfall between the housing benefit and the private sector rents in some cases. In other words, in more expensive areas, the local housing allowance could be much lower than the market rents, as it is in my area. Banks and insurers saw benefit claimants as a higher risk. So again, your mortgage company, if you've got a buy-to-let mortgage, may not allow you to let to benefit tenants. So you need to check that as a landlord. And also landlords are trying to avoid extra fees that they may incur in going for credit searches and referencing agencies when they know that they're going to be refused. Because if you go through one of these rental guarantee schemes, it may just automatically refuse people in that situation. And we know that complaints about universal credit are widespread, taking months to pay landlords, as has happened to me, and then giving the rent directly to the tenant and mix it in with their benefit payment, which is not the way it was supposed to be set up. But they just ignore. I think some of these people honestly dislike landlords. They're actually jealous of landlords who, they see as making all this money out of poor tenants and that sort of thing. And I think they purposely say, well, we're going to give the rent to these tenants directly. I really do think that goes on, judging by some of the people I've come across in the past. And they do seem to make life very difficult. You can't call them, you can't get hold of anybody, you can't. There's various numbers on the website. When you ring the website, the government website, that number's discontinued. And they use this COVID-19 excuse, but I can't see why they can't take a phone call. I was going to say something else. A phone call due to COVID-19. It's a joke. And basically, there's no way of getting through to them on the phone. There's no email addresses you can send anything to. The job centres where they all hide inside, they're looking out the window. You can't get in there because of COVID-19. A lot of government departments, believe in quangos, have used COVID-19 to cover up a multitude of sins and basically as an excuse for giving bad service or zero service. So we know that there's problems with universal credit, and that's why landlords have avoided them. Now, I've had experience in both. I've had experience with private and tenants and DSS tenants. And, I won't go into all of that now, but there's risks on both sides, obviously. Now, just talk about Shelter, for instance. Shelter is the organisation that brought this case, and I'm putting a link up to Shelter. You can look them up on my website, on moneytipsdaily.com and on Facebook. Shelter is what I would call a left-leaning charity which campaigns for the end of things like no-fault evictions. They've campaigned the government, lobbied the government to end no-fault evictions, which are what? Just a landlord saying, your tenancy's come to an end, or we're giving you notice that we'd like the property back, and they call it a no-fault eviction. It's a very twisted form of using language to make it sound like it's a bad thing. No-fault evictions. You're evicting the tenant. No, the tenancy's come to an end, and under the agreement, you should leave. Why should I have to go for a no-fault eviction? They want all that ended. They want to stop landlords being able to get people out when they need to, which could be for a variety of reasons. It could be for, it doesn't mean that the tenant's at fault. It could be that the landlord wants to sell the property. It could be the landlord's retiring or going abroad or whatever. But why is it called a no-fault eviction when it shouldn't even be an eviction? You come to the end of your agreement, you go. Just like any other agreement. They also want to campaign for further regulation in the social housing sector, as if we haven't got enough regulation, and new laws to force landowners and developers to give out more land for social housing. They call this landowners and developers using loopholes to get out of providing social housing. Well, no, they don't. I was in the planning committee of a local council. I was a councillor. Yeah, they come to an agreement with some landlords who say, look, we are building luxury apartments here. They're going to sell for £1 million a time. We can't then put a corner of them and say this is for social housing. So what do? They give them money. They give the council money to build social housing. And what do the council do? They sit on this money and it builds up and builds up. So don't blame these loopholes. Yeah, you can't build a luxury housing development, and then put social housing on the same place. It's going to devalue the properties that they're trying to sell for a higher price, and that's democracy. That's capitalism. You know, that's why the developers are there, to make money. And I've seen a block of flats where they've got 3 blocks and 1 block is social housing. And believe me, if you go in, you see 1 block, you look outside, and they've got an underground sort of car park at the back, nice, tidy. You know, that's okay. And then you go to another one, yeah, that's fine. And the social housing block, believe me, it's a mess. People don't even collect their posts from the box. It's all, the boxes are brimming with post. There's cars there in bits and tyres left around, and generally a mess. They had to close off the rooftop garden because people were going up there having barbecues and burning the roof, chucking things off the roof, all sorts of things. So, you know, the social housing tenants are making the other people who bought their properties and paid money for their properties a bit of a misery, really. It looks terrible. And you could just look and you could say that's the social housing sector. There's other housing places I've been to where you could look and see that the privately owned houses, and then you see a corner over there, same houses, but why are they dirty? Why are they're bikes in the front garden, and tyres and unkept lawns? You know, and these are people in social housing actually have more time to cut their lawns and look after their houses. So believe me, I've seen it from both ends, and I don't come from a wealthy family. You know, when my family were immigrants, they came here to the UK. I grew up partly in social housing when I was young. I grew up in social, so I know what it's like, and I know the mentality of saying, well, this is not my house, so I'm going to make a mess. It's the council's problem. I'm not going to pick that bit of paper up outside. The council should do something about this. I've seen that mentality firsthand, so I know what it's like. And that's why since then I've always lived in my own place. I've always bought my own property. I've never gone back to council housing. Anyway, back to Shelter. Shelter, as I said, is more of a I'd say a left-wing pressure group. They have an annual income of 67 million, according to their accounts, of which 18 million comes from grants and contracts. Some of that is government money. It's government grants. And we know that government money is taxpayers' money. Now, they reported a £3.5 million surplus. As a charity, you can't have a profit because they don't pay tax, but you can have a surplus. So they're making money. And the chief executive, do you know what the chief executive's salary is of this charity? It's not a small charity, by the way. The chief executive's salary is £128,000, 4 times the national average wage. It's probably like 8 times the minimum wage, and this chief executive is on a fantastic wage, almost up to where the levels of the Prime Minister would earn. Shelter also holds £16 million in reserves, not money in working capital, reserves. They sit on £16 million, and they had a balance after everything was paid out in 2018-19 of £26 million. Now that money could build an awful lot of social housing, but Shelter don't do that. They don't provide any housing. They just shout and talk about it and get onto landlords and provide advice, but they don't, and lobby the government, but they don't actually build any housing or provide any shelter. That's the name, shelter. And basically, organisations like this would like to take the private renting sector back 70 years to the good old days of, rent controls where the rent is almost fixed for life, and lifelong tenancies where you cannot get a tenant out. They're called sit-in tenants. Remember those sit-in tenants? I remember houses even as far as into the 80s and 90s where a house was sold with a sit-in tenant, usually a 98-year-old woman that has been there since the 1960s and pays the same rent as they did in the 1960s. So they're paying like less than £1 a week, and they won't move. They've been offered money to move. So you buy the house with the sit-in tenant in, and basically the owner then either pays them a lot of money to move or just waits for them to die, so that the house then becomes more valuable. So this is not the way we want the private rented sector to go, because if you do that again, if you go back to that stage, which we ended that by bringing in new rules and assured short-hold tenancies, in the early 2000s. If you go back to those days, then what's going to happen? Landlords would just say, well, we can't get into that. We're going to, leave the sector in droves. And unlike in the 60s where you had massive council housing building programs, you don't have that now. So we know that, if shelter had their way, landlords, including me, would just pack up and go, sell up and say, that's it, I'm out of here. Because, we can't go into that situation. And ironically, rent controls and these old ways of doing things in the 1950s and 60s led to a shortage of rental properties in the private sector. And it led to rogue slum landlords who just ignored everything. And it was the very reason that shelter was set up by one man as a charity, a small charity to lobby for better housing for people. That's why it was set up. So you don't want to go back to that stage. Now, everyone in the UK should have a home, but does it mean you have a right to a home? Does it mean you have a right to rent from a private landlord regardless of your circumstances? Well, I don't think so. We're supposed to be living in a free and democratic capitalist country. We're not in a Marxist state here. And landlords must be able to choose who they rent to. Do you want somebody in your house that has the ability to pay, or do you want to sort of take your chances and be forced to take on somebody that is unemployed? So, this is not a political blog here, but, we know that communism, socialism doesn't work. It's been tried all over the world. It's failed in failed states like the USSR, Venezuela, recently North Korea, and yet it keeps coming back like a virus you can't kill. Now, Karl Marx's idea of capital in the hands of the people, land in the hands of the people, of the state, not in the hands of the people, but in the hands of the state, just doesn't work. It led to starvation on a massive scale. Chairman Mao killed millions and millions of Chinese people through starvation. People have died of starvation in North Korea. People are dying of poverty in Venezuela. So this system doesn't work. Now you might say, well, are China communist? Do you really think so? I think they're more of a fascist state that has brought in capitalism but controlled by the state. And if I don't know if you've seen this documentary. It's called American Factory. It's only on Netflix, I think. But American Factory, it documents in 2016 a Chinese company called Fuyao that makes glass for cars. It makes windscreens, and they set up an American factory in Ohio, the old Rust Belt, where they used to have General Motors and big employers, and they're now gone. And they set up this factory. And the chairman comes over and sets this factory. It was embraced by the community. They were happy to see a company setting up a factory in that area. They had a skilled workforce that could work on assembly lines and knew how to do this job. And it was going very well. But then things started to turn a bit sour. What they found was that the American workers couldn't keep up with the pace that the Chinese supervisors, there were 200 of them, kept demanding, go faster, go faster. And in private conversations, you could see them saying, these Americans are slow, their fingers are fat, they can't work very fast. And then some of the workers wanted to bring in a union. And there was a lobby for union. Now, incidentally, you think, well, union's fine. It's a Chinese company, they're a communist country. Why wouldn't they want a union? But no, the chairman didn't. He said, I don't want a union because it will hit our profits. If we have a union, it will slow us down. We'll make less money. And in fact, he then employed a labour relations company, paid them £1 million to lobby against bringing in a union. And when the vote came, the vote was to stay as they were and not bring in a union. So it was interesting to see that culture difference, and also the fact that the Chinese owner did not want a union. He didn't want anybody controlling his factory and slowing things down. So there you go. I think with regards to social housing, also as a landlord, you may need to check your mortgage because they might not let you rent to social housing. And the private sector is not there to pick up the pieces of the failures of successive governments to build enough social housing. And that's a fact. We haven't seen any major new towns built, major new social housing put on the ground since the 1970s. If you think about towns like in Milton Keynes, Harlow, Basildon, they were built on rail links going into London or up north or east-west, that sort of thing. And they were built with proper road links, already with existing roads, and they were planned in the 1960s, right? 70 years ago, and built in the 1970s. Since then, nothing's happened. It's just like nothing. And councils are able to build social housing. The government allows them to borrow money at favourable rates, very low interest rates, but they won't build they won't build council housing. They just leave it to the private sector to give them a few bits of social housing every time they are allowed to build a housing development, but it's not enough. And the council say, well, if we build social housing, people might buy them in the future. Well, so what? Let them buy them. It's crazy. I've seen it from the inside, and I said to my council, why aren't we building council housing? We've got a lot of land around here. We could build new council housing for people that basically can't really afford private rented housing, and they want security, and they want to know that they're in a house and that's it. That they're there for life. But I think only the government can provide that. I don't think a private landlord can provide that. What happens if a private landlord dies, for instance? That house then becomes part of that landlord's estate. That property would probably have to be sold off to repay any debt, or it would be inherited by relatives who might want to just sell it and take the money. So there's all sorts of reasons why a private landlord cannot provide a lifelong tenancy in a way that councils can provide it, or housing associations for that matter. So something's got to change here, and I don't think you can just bash private landlords on the head. I know I'm having a bit of a rant here because I'm a private landlord, but more and more regulations come in. Now landlords have to, in some areas, have to pay for a license. What do I need a license for? There's already regulation against providing bad housing. It's just a money-making scheme by councils. Let's charge the landlord a license, like £500, just so that they can say, yes, you can rent your property in my area. It's all wrong. It really is wrong. We already pay taxes. We pay our taxes. We don't need councils then setting up their own independent socialist state and saying, right, we're going to charge you a license fee. And believe me, most of the councils who do this are left-wing councils, definitely. And some of them just hate landlords. They hate landlords. So there you go. They hate private landlords anyway. But there you go. Now, other news this week. If you've got a credit card and you're paying 16-17%, despite the fact that base rates are now almost at zero, the credit card companies are still charging 16%, 17%, 20%. Now, a few months ago when the sort of crisis hit, a lot of the credit card companies started withdrawing their zero interest balance transfers. Well, these are starting to come back now. So check out that, have a look out for that. You might be able to transfer your balance to zero interest for a year or two, and then you'd have more money left because you're not paying interest. You'd have more money available to pay off the capital. But make sure you do pay off the capital. Don't just use that and then go and borrow more money on the credit card that you've just cleared. We saw that there's a chance that city centre offices could be in trouble if more employers have all of their workers working from home. We know that before the crisis there were 2 million workers working at home. Then it jumped to 12 million when the crisis hit, and it's still at something like 7 or 8 million people are now working from home. It's not suitable for everybody, and believe me, if you're working from home now, you're really one step from your job being just outsourced to India or the Philippines. That I can see that happening. I really can. Outsourcing now is much easier for smaller companies. It used to be the domain of big companies. You could set up call centres in Mumbai and Manila, now even small companies can outsource a lot of work, a lot of white collar jobs. We saw the outsourcing of manufacturing, blue collar jobs in the 70s and 80s. It's coming now for white collar jobs. It's a worrying trend. I don't think it's right. I think if banks make their money in this country, they should employ people in this country. Banks and institutions, even government departments are outsourcing jobs. It's a scandal, really. For big companies to do that on a massive scale. And if it leads to more unemployment here, then how are these banks going to make a profit here if all their customers haven't got a job? We know that banks have tried to set up subsidiaries in abroad, and they've failed in most cases, and their money is made here. So they should employ people. They should be loyal to the people of this country and the people that they employ, their customers as well. Other news. Eat Out to Help Out scheme, the Chancellor's scheme, that ends on Monday, but some establishments have decided to extend that and will still offer a discount for another month or so. And I also talked this week about the thousands of people trapped in leasehold flats that are unsellable due to the cladding on the outside. That's a scandal that's brewing. Government's got to step in and do something about that. So that's all for now. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And I hope you all have a really great weekend wherever you are and whatever you're doing. And please stay safe. Thanks for everyone on Facebook Live and on YouTube. Please click the like button if you can when I post this. It always helps with my ratings. And yeah, thanks for everyone. Thanks Dagmar there up in Norway. I hope things are going well up there. I understand Norway's not a country that's been severely hit by the crisis. I expect they're more worried about the oil prices up there in Norway. But anyway, wish you well and wish you a great weekend. Thanks for everyone and have a great weekend. Bye for now.